My friends, this video is about working with high dynamic range black and white images using Adobe Lightroom Classic. Set the past aside, please, because today I want to talk to you about how to edit your black and white images for maximum impact on a modern computer screen. You will not be able to see the magic here if you try to watch this video using an older display or the wrong web browser. Please watch this lesson on your newest screen or on a recent model smartphone using the Google Chrome browser. Also, this one is for those of you who already have strong Lightroom image editing skills. With these warnings out of the way, let's get started. For almost 2 decades, we have been working with the tone controls inside of Lightroom's basic panel to shape our raw images. We've been moving the blacks, whites, shadows, and highlights controls around for years to set the brightness and the contrast level throughout our images. In black and white photography, tones refer to all of the shades of gray that we have in our image. Black and white photos have dark tones, like this region. We have mid-tones, like this region. And we have light tones that run all the way up to white without detail. But here's the thing that might blow your mind. Compare this to this. The image on the left is the one that I edited for use on an old SDR monitor, and the one on the right is the version that I tuned up for my MacBook Pro's expanded dynamic range display. So now that you've seen the kind of HDR imagery that I'm going to talk about in this video, let's dig into how I made this higher dynamic range black and white. If I move the tone sliders in the basic panel around carefully, then I can craft a black and white image that looks like this. I wouldn't call what's on the screen right now a prize winner, but I think that this photo is pleasing enough, and this is the best that I can do while I'm limited to the tonal range that an SDR monitor can display. I'm going to make a virtual copy of this image at this point so that we can compare what you see right now with the version that I'm about to create. Now, I'm going to tap on the HDR Editing Mode button up here at the top of the basic panel. Once you unlock the door, HDR Editing Mode offers us a much larger range of tones that we can use to make our black and white images come alive. With the expanded dynamic range, we can make everything, especially the light tones in our photograph, much, much brighter. But it's easy to get carried away. This expanded dynamic range is amazing, and at first, everyone wants to crank things all the way up, but there are still technical and artistic limits. If I crank the white slider too far up, then you can see that things still get all blown out. Once your initial instinct to push everything to an extreme wears off, then there are guardrails that we can employ to prevent us from making an overexposed mess. The first, and hopefully the most familiar trick for you, is the Alt-click trick. If you hold down the Alt key on a PC or the Alt Option key on a Mac while you click and drag the whites slider, then an overlay will appear. In HDR Editing Mode, this overlay is a little different than what you're seeing in SDR editing. In this view, the yellow areas represent the parts of this image that are brighter than what an SDR screen can display. And the red areas represent the parts of this image that are out of range, even on my XDR monitor. My goal when moving any of these sliders is to keep things within the usable range. So I'll move this one right up until some of those red dots start to appear and no further. Let's pause here for a second so that I can show you how this image compares to the SDR version that you saw just a minute ago. As you can see, our HDR version is far more engaging, but do me a favor and ask yourself what really pulls your attention in. When you're editing your images, always remember that our eyes are inherently attracted to the brightest parts of any photograph. With this in mind, let's return to the Develop module with the SDR image, and let's talk about another feature that can help us keep our obsession with highlight brightness in check. Traditionally, the x-axis on Lightroom's histogram ranges in brightness from 0 to 100%. And we can say that something is 0% luminance if it's pure black, and that something is about 100% luminance if it's white without detail. Hopefully that concept and the clipping indicators in the right and left corners of the histogram are old news for you. When we switch over to the HDR image, though, the histogram changes. In HDR mode, the left part of the histogram contains the entire SDR range of tones. But now the x-axis extends far beyond that limited tonal range. These vertical gray lines to the right of the SDR limit, these indicate the range of tones that are available above the standard SDR white point. For example, this area represents the tones that are up to one stop above SDR white. The next area to the right represents tones that are up to two stops above SDR white, and so on. Theoretically, the MacBook Pro that I'm using right now has a screen that can display tones all the way up to about 3.5 stops above the SDR limit. Beneath the hood, Lightroom has evaluated this display's capabilities, and it won't let me push things beyond what this screen could possibly display. That's the reason why this little sliver at the far right end of the histogram is marked off with dark gray. That's helpful technical knowledge, but just because my computer can display up to 3.5 additional stops of brightness does not mean that I need to use that much range for my HDR image editing. So if I click here beside the words HDR limit, then I can lower the threshold of what's allowed for this image down to a lower maximum white point. In this case, I'll pick the 2-stop limit. Once I set this to a 2-stop limit, notice how Lightroom blocks off a much larger slice of the histogram with that dark gray color. Also, with this lower threshold set, notice how the waterfall now looks blown out. This, of course, indicates that my current tone settings are pushing pixels beyond the new 2-stop limit. To fix this, I need to adjust all of those tone sliders again. To be clear, the routine that I suggest is to set the HDR limit right after you enter HDR editing mode and before you adjust any of the tone sliders. But for teaching purposes, it made sense to do things out of order on this example. Anyway, once I've optimized again for the 2-stop limit, our image looks pretty good and I'm happy. It's true that what you're seeing right now is not as striking as the full range version we had a minute ago. But you have to remember that not every screen is capable of displaying 3+ stops of expanded range, nor do we need to push things that far to get our message across. Let me show you that same SDR HDR side-by-side comparison one more time to drive this point home. See, it doesn't take the full range of possible HDR tones to make a much stronger image and to make this beautiful waterfall look absolutely magnetic. If you've made it this far, then I want to share one more example with you. This time, I'm going to follow my workflow for extended dynamic range black and white editing from start to finish. The first thing that I'm going to do is to enable the HDR editing mode. And then I'm going to set the HDR limit to 2 stops. Next, I'm going to choose a black and white profile that gives this image a solid starting point. And then I'm going to quickly push our baseline for the black and white conversion a little further using the black and white mix panel. Next, I'm going to return to the basic panel and maximize the tones throughout this image. This looks pretty good, but there is another set of important controls that I have completely ignored throughout this lesson. If we're really looking for maximum control, then the tone curve panel, of course, is an essential feature. What most people miss is that there are 2 super helpful features in here. Throughout this tutorial, I've been using that Alt-click trick when I went to move the basic module's exposure or white slider for additional precision. And I'd love to do that here, but the Alt-click trick does not work with any of the tone curve controls. Fortunately, there is a secret keyboard shortcut, the letter J, that does the same thing. Why the J key, not the Alt key? Who knows? But now that we have our clipping overlay, we can move these sliders around with the same level of precision that we're used to using in the basic panel. As you can see from the darker gray histogram in the back, the vast majority of the tones in this image are in the lights and darks regions. So those are the sliders that I'm going to move first. As I push these up, the whole image gets brighter, and the clipping overlay is a great way to know when I've moved things far enough. At this point, I'm starting to get a couple of red spots, which of course indicates that some of my brightest pixels are starting to blow out again. To prevent that from happening, I'm going to bring the highlights control in here down. And for a final refinement at the brights end, I'm going to drag this triangle here, the bright splits control, around. Moving the splits expands or contracts the range of tones that are within each zone. Let me zoom in here so you can get a better sense of what this is doing. Most people miss this feature, but by using the splits control, I can further refine which tones are or are not considered a highlight on this curve. This looks good, so I'll nudge the shadow slider a little too and adjust its splits control if needed. It's not a night and day difference, but the additional brightness and contrast adds a nice kick. To see a really dramatic difference, let me split my screen once more so that you can see this HDR image compared to an SDR version that I made before I started recording this tutorial. Once again, the HDR has so much more impact and detail. The bright whites in the surf in the HDR version just draw your eyes in, and the whole image feels cleaner, crisper, and far more three-dimensional. Well, there you go. This lesson is just the tip of the iceberg in this whole new world of HDR editing, but this has been enough for one tutorial. I hope that you found this video helpful. If you learned something today, then please leave us a like or a comment down below, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in our next tutorial.